Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing the speed build of Landscaping the Inherited Manor challenge. This wasn't a live stream or anything, I just recorded it, sped it up so that I could discuss what we did. You might notice a couple of weird parts here and there at the beginning here. That's because I actually made a TikTok of this as well. And let's talk about one method, I guess, the method I use for landscaping large properties, because this seems like a good opportunity to discuss that. First, the best thing you can do for yourself is try to break it up into sections visually. The way that I did that mostly with this one is I started with that terrain manipulation and the adding of some of those ponds and things, and then second level of sort of splitting it up into zones was actually to paint the terrain first. I pretty much only paint terrain first in large builds like this. Otherwise, I tend to shape the landscaping and then paint the terrain. Really, it depends on the garden style you're going for. But for this one, I really wanted to visualize it as early as possible. Plus, that was going to make it a lot easier to start placing those plants. So, if you've been around the channel for a hot minute, you know my general method, which is grab 1 to 3 shrub items depending on the size of the lot. This was a 3 shrub lot for sure. And then again, 3 to 5 different flowers. May or may not switch out the swatches. Now for the flowers, I actually just stuck with like solitary swatches for each one, because my end goal with this landscaping is to make it look intentionally placed, like every plant sort of has a purpose. So I didn't want to mix up the swatches too much, but I did still want that variety of size and texture, so I went with just, I think I ended up using 5 different sort of flower options, and I went through with a couple of fillers as well at the end. So the first thing I did with the bushes, which you're seeing here, is I went through and I started one at a time. I started with like the round ones and sort of placed those a little bit more strategically, right, because those are more like structured bushes, you know, you obviously have to prune those to keep that shape. And then I grabbed some of these more unkempt sort of bushes and started putting those in to give it a little bit of a more natural feel. Because again, kind of trying to find the balance here between super manicured and intentional with such a large estate. Obviously you'd have some sort of groundskeeper or just kids that you give a pretty good allowance to, I suppose, for all these gardens, or you really love gardening. Anyway, and then I also went in with some rocks. Rocks are really important. They add color, they add texture, they add direction. They fill up spaces so that you don't actually have to like mess too much with adding too many flowers, because if you add too many plants, honestly, it can kind of get overwhelming. And you need a break in that green, which is one of the reasons I chose the hostas for my 3rd shrub. Because when I started adding those in, I did go through and actually re-swatch those. Those are the only plants that I re-swatched at all. But that kind of like blue, that super blue green, is it even green? It really feels mostly blue. That also, along with the rocks, really helped break up all of that green. That's also why I don't landscape the entire yard, and you want to like alternate with the like open lawn portions versus landscape portions. And one of the reasons I'm so adamant about using terrain paint and spilling it out from under the plants a little bit, again, just too much green on green on green on green on green, it's just going to be too much. That might look really nice in real life, right? Like when you're driving through the forest and there's just all that green, but even if you think about it, right, there's still rocks and there are trunks and there are different shades of green, or especially like if you're in Michigan like me, we have so many different kinds of trees, and it's beautiful. But something about a video game with those pixels of green just screaming in your face the whole time, too much green is too much green. So the hostas really helped with that. And the rocks, of course. And then bringing in the flowers, of course, will add more, just more color. When I started in with the flowers, I started with sort of the standard like place a few here, place a few there, and I realized that was going to be a little bit too mixed up. So some of the plants are more mixed up and some of them are just placed all in groups. Oh, I also talked briefly about adding trees. Because this is such a large space, I wanted to create as much variance in height in the landscaping still as I could as well, without blocking too much of the build, and I did that by adding a few trees. To make them look more decorative, I chose trees that were not native to the area, but I added a couple of trees that also looked native as well, because that is also a really important part of landscaping, is make it not look too crazy. Like if you put all this landscaping in the desert, it would totally look out of place. But in a more temperate climate, so long as you're mixing in some of the plants from that area as well as more imported plants, if that matters, that can really help. But yeah, once I started going in with the flowers, some of them were a little bit more staggered, and then some of them I ended up placing in sort of rivers, which I talked about in a build a while ago when I did a rooftop cafe, which if you're interested in, I'll link it here, I'll make a note of that. And I talked about how I was trying sort of a new landscaping method for larger landscapes, because if you just do all the higgledy-piggledy, it can look good, but it really suits more cottage type or low, not like low class, that's a really crude way to put it, but like not $1 million properties, basically. And for multi-million dollar properties, which this is only like 400,000 simoleons, but in real life, there's no way. For those properties, it actually can be helpful to sort of group plants more like, and I got this from a charcuterie board TikTok, where you make groupings and rivers where you don't make it too geometric. You want to keep the shapes organic, but sort of like running into each other. So you'll see some of that erupt with the flowers here as well. Believe it or not, I was trying to keep the camera somewhat stationary, but I had some issues. Eventually I figured out I was holding Alt-Shift to place all the plants, but then I was accidentally hitting Alt-Enter, which was making the window bug out. But I really was trying to keep the camera as stationary as possible so that this speed build wasn't going to be too, like, jerking around too much. Also, if any of you are interested in becoming Sims creators or you want to learn more about how to make speed builds, let me tell you my method, because it's easy and I need something else to talk about. First, you just record the whole thing, whatever you're doing. Don't worry about pausing the recording. You can cut it out later. So like if you have to go get a drink of coffee or whatever, just leave it be. And then when you're done recording, put it into your editing system and change the speed of the clip. I prefer to stick with about 600%, which is what you see here. However, if it makes sense and it's not going to cause too much jumpy movement, I might put it all the way up to 800, but that's about it. Once you do that, export that. Don't try to edit it anymore because your program is going to be struggling unless you have like a bunch of money for a huge computer and all that stuff, which I don't know if you do. But if you don't, you're going to export that 600% speed clip and then you'll transport that into your new project or your standard project template or whatever, right? Like what I have here that I'm working from, where I always have the same background music and like level set and all that stuff. Once you put that sped up clip into your primary sort of editing project, that's what it's called. Once you put it in your standard project to actually like work from, I like to do the voiceover before I finish editing because that gives me a little bit more flexible space for if I mess up, I can cut out what I said wrong, and that also is when you'll cut out all of those pieces of the video that you don't necessarily need in there, like when the camera's sitting still for too long or whatever. So record your voiceover. I use OBS for pretty much everything, and then you go back in and then you edit it all together. That is my method for making a speed build. I don't know if that information is helpful to you or not, but there it is. Plus, if you're just curious about how to make a speed build, like I was before I even thought that I would get into YouTube, that's kind of the method. Another thing that you might notice I've done is lay down the dirt terrain paint before I lay down my like path terrain paint, which I'm using gravel right now. We'll see if that still fits the vibes when we go through and do the playtesting. Once I had the plants pretty much figured out where I wanted them to go and everything, I did go through and resize and shuffle some of them around. Now if the lot is too expensive, it's going to be pretty easy to go through and sort of rearrange some of the plants, delete some here or there. Most of what I wanted was to create some texture there, and I really do prefer the really full looking landscaping. Like this house has been around for a while. Those plants have spread, you know? But if we wanted to change the landscaping to make it look a little bit younger, a little bit more fresh, a really easy way to do that would be to space those plants out a little bit more. Plus it would be cheaper that way. My goal is to keep it around the 400,000 simoleon mark, so we'll see. It should be pretty good. I also added these giant rocks just to try and blend things in a little bit, and I wanted some waterfalls and I wanted them to look more natural, so adding more large rocks around the property was going to help with that. Now in order to create waterfalls, you do need to have a sim on the lot because you have to be able to go into live mode, so I will be doing that here shortly as soon as I'm done going through and resizing all of these plants. Now for the initial challenge, the original, the OG, I did have the garden landscaping space as part of the challenge. I don't plan on doing that with this one. I'm planning on directing the story in a little bit of a different direction, more like murder party gone wrong, or gone right, I guess. Murder party and then destroying the evidence basically before fleeing. It's kind of the storyline. Probably going to go with the poll. As of recording this, I think the poll is in favor of the slow and steady method where we actually pick off the Sims one by one, but we will see what the end result is. Also, just got a message on my Discord, so hey, if you haven't already, check out the links in the video description to join the Discord servers. There is a standard server just for like the YouTube channel stuff, so whether you're a YouTube creator or not, join that server. It's a good time. We talk about like nerdy building stuff and whatever. And then if you specifically are interested in this challenge, Q&A and all that sort of stuff, that will be available. Like that's a whole other server as well. Anyway, let's talk about waterfalls. To place a waterfall, what you have to do is you have to place a bunch of fountains, and then you go into live mode, and then you go back into build mode, and then the fountains are running, and then you put the fountains in place, and then the fountains stop running. So then you go back into live mode, and then the fountains are running again, and then you go back into build mode, and you check and make sure the fountains are where you want them, and if they're not where you want them, you have to move them again, and then the fountains stop running again, and you have to go back into live mode to let the fountains run. It's a whole thing, but it is so worth it. You'll notice that I'm rearranging a lot of the fountains. Also, as you place them, it's really helpful to go back in and add more plants or more rocks or whatever to keep it sort of looking like it's flowing naturally. The main thing you want to avoid is being able to see a bunch of that like upward spraying of the water, because that, like, it's waterfalls don't go up, you know. And if I wanted a geyser, I would have picked one of the jet water fountain pieces, but I didn't want a geyser. I just wanted a nice little waterfall. And I tried to not go too crazy with the fountains. Sometimes I'll just have this like massive flowing waterfall. It's fantastic. However, it really dries up your water bill, plus the fountains are crazy expensive. Haven't decided yet for the rules how much of the landscaping you're able to remove for money. Like, it feels cheaty to just go through and delete all the plants because they are expensive. Yeah, so I'll have to figure out how I want to write that in. But then again, you know, when you're creating your graveyard and everything, it would totally make sense to move some of the plants or remove them, so probably you can only remove plants if you're creating a graveyard there. But I did try to leave some empty space for graveyards as well. If you are really interested in adding waterfalls and this is just going too fast, I do have a waterfall tutorial as a short, and do I just have it as a short? I think I just have it as a short. I don't think I have like a full-size, full-length waterfall video. Whichever one it is, I'll link that here as well so you can check that out. If it's a short, it's only like a minute, so you can watch that and then come back if you want to. Yeah, I highly recommend adding them to your builds. They add just like that texture and that polish and that like, oh, that's really cool, you know, like it's a nice way, especially if you're trying to grow your gallery following or whatever, to show that you have, like, you've got some building skill. Not that I'm trying to pat myself on the back here, but this is a really big build. I think the waterfalls suited it really nicely. Also, you can tell I'm a builder and a landscaper, because then you go inside and it's like, eh? But again, that's the point of the challenge. I make it look pretty on the outside, then you guys make it look pretty on the inside. Ooh, stepping stone path. I want to talk about this as well, because again, I'm just going to share my method, because that's why you're here. You're watching my videos. Assume you like knowing how I do things. So, first thing I did was lay down terrain paint to get the general shape of my path, and then what I'm doing is I'm going through with the largest stones first, and I did not use debug. There is no debug in this build. There's limited move objects. I rescaled a few things, but I tried to not use move objects to like raise and lower objects aside from the landscaping with the waterfalls and everything, just because I want this build to be like as accessible and playable as possible, and that is more likely to mess with things. Anyway, so I didn't use the debug stones. I just used the little like $5 rug or whatever from Get Together, and I went through and did the normal size ones, and then I went through and rearranged it a little bit, and then I went through with scaled down once, rearranged it a little bit, and I went through and scaled down twice and then rearranged it a little bit. And basically what this method does is it helps it look fairly random but pretty filled in, and then when you erase that terrain paint and go through and paint specifically around each stone, it's going to look like you went through and placed each individual one and then painted it, even though you technically painted first to get the shape of the path. So it gives the path a better shape, basically, more easily. And then I arranged a few other stones really quick. Finalizing the terrain paint and then deciding if I wanted any other yard activities. I did put a bike in the carriage house there, which your sim is of course totally able to use. Whether it'll burn or not, I don't know. We shall see. So you might have to replace it before you can use it, but that can really help with traveling around, with getting fun up, especially if you're playing where you have no power and no lights, right? No water or anything. Your sim's needs can get down really, really fast, so that can really help. I did add some vines on the outside. I know vines aren't everyone's aesthetic, but I thought it would help with that sort of like, this is a really old build sort of vibe. So I did use some of the vines from Cottage Living. Again, I didn't use any of the debug ones, and I tried to just stick with this one particular set because the other ones just weren't fitting as well. Or like the Get Together vines, they look like they were, like most of them have trellises on them, so it's as if they were placed there specifically. Whereas the Cottage Living vines are much more like, oops, this is growing on the house now, which is kind of the vibe I wanted. I did scale some of these up, and these are expensive, so if the lot ends up being too expensive, again, the vines and landscaping are probably going to be the first things to go, because the furniture is there for a more specific purpose, but once we burn everything down, the lot will be worth less, so that will help as well. Coming up on the end of the video here, so thanks so much for hanging out. Again, if you're super excited, like I am, to see how this challenge comes together and start playing it, the Discord server is a great place to be. Otherwise, I'll keep posting updates and stuff here, so here on YouTube. Also, TikTok is a good place. Instagram, I just forget about constantly, so maybe not Instagram, honestly. I mean, you can. I just only post there like every other week because I just forget it exists. I don't know if I can post it on Reddit or not, still figuring that out. But anyway, thanks for building with me today, and I look forward to building with you again later this afternoon. Bye!